focus is on traveller maternal and infant health. And we're delighted to see so many colleagues this morning as we launch what we believe will be really important resources towards revitalising breastfeeding in the traveller community. Just a bit around our work. So Pavee Point has always, had a focus on traveller health inequalities, and has always used, I suppose, a social determinants approach to health to understand the reasons, or I suppose the outcomes in terms of traveller health. And it's always been informed by the right to health. And we, I suppose, alongside the WHO and the UN and other human rights bodies, see breastfeeding as a human rights issue for traveller babies and traveller mothers. And the purpose of today's event is to provide a spotlight on traveller breastfeeding, as the needs of traveller women often remain invisible in policy and service provision. And we've remained very concerned at, the very low breastfeeding rates of traveller women, which is in and around 2%. And this is compared to around 60% in terms of the general population breastfeeding, which most people here know today is recognised as low in terms of other European member states. And we know, I suppose, now more than ever, the importance of breastfeeding and how critical it is in supporting healthy outcomes. And our work under the Pavee Point, under the Pavee Mothers Initiative, which is funded by the Eastern Region Traveller Health Unit, was launched in 2018. And it's the first national traveller perinatal health initiative, which really aims to address traveller maternal and infant health inequalities. And you'll hear from Stephanie McDonald, our Pavee Mothers worker, later, just around some of those poor health outcomes and what we do, I suppose, to try and address those. And our approach is really a two-pronged approach, always informed by community development. So first, we work with travel organisations and primary healthcare projects on the ground to create the conditions to keep traveller women and babies healthy. And that's through health awareness raising and health advocacy. And then secondly, we see, policy and service provision also equally as important in addressing some of those inequalities. And so we work with policymakers in the HSE to address that and to ensure that traveller women's needs are prioritised both in policy and service provision levels. And of course, a key component to all of this work is the promotion of breastfeeding, both on the ground and through policy and service provision. So this morning we will be launching a number of resources, including our traveller specific resource, which explores and I suppose really sets out some of the key questions that our traveller women and our primary healthcare project have raised around breastfeeding, and a briefing paper which identifies some of the broader challenges that traveller women have identified in terms of initiating and maintaining breastfeeding. And we always, Pavee Point always comes up with clear solutions. So we also have clear, I suppose, recommendations to address some of those key issues. We have a number of speakers today, so all of whom are really passionate about breastfeeding and have been real strong advocates and allies in terms of traveller women and traveller women's rights, including Mrs. Bina Higgins, Mary Collins from our primary healthcare project, and the Assistant National Breastfeeding Coordinator, Mina Purushothaman, and Martina Quealy, Chief Officer of Community Healthcare East and Chair of our Traveller Health Unit in the Eastern Region. So just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. So we will be recording today's event, and the video will be available on our website. We have a really full schedule, so in the interest of time, there won't be a Q&A as such, but please feel free to come back to us and keep in touch with us if you have any questions. We'll send out all of the slides to those that are on the call this morning, and all of the resources will be available on our website. Participants will be muted, but if you have any issues, you can contact the host in the meantime. So without any further delay, it's my greatest pleasure to welcome Mrs. Sabina Higgins to provide opening remarks. And just in terms of Sabina Higgins, Sabina Coyne, who is now Sabina Higgins, was born in the Galway-Mayo border and went to school in Mayo. And at 18, she moved up to Dublin to work in the office of the Land Commission and began to study acting and became one of the founding members of the Focus Theatre. Sabina, of course, is the wife of President of Ireland, Michael D. Higgins, who was inaugurated in 2011 for a 7-year term and again in 2018. And Sabina and President Higgins have been steadfast supporters and allies of the traveller community, and we've been fortunate to have them join us at events in Pavee Point over a number of years. And Sabina is also a huge advocate and supporter of breastfeeding. So without further ado, we'd love to hear from Sabina. I think you're on mute, Sabina. Sabina, we can't hear you.
I've sent a request there. Yeah,
there we go. Great.
Is it? Yeah.
That's
well,
right.
I will say again, thank you very much, Lindsay, for that lovely introduction. And happy Breastfeeding Week to everybody. I'm so happy to join with you all at Pavee Point to celebrate Breastfeeding Week, and in particular, to celebrate the fact that there's a growing knowledge of the importance of breastfeeding. I'm delighted also to be with you for the launch of Pavee Women's video and information booklet for traveller women wishing to breastfeed their babies. I would like to commence by acknowledging the significant work that has been done by Pavee Point and Primary Healthcare Project across the county to support and encourage breastfeeding among traveller women. I would also like to welcome the HSE partners who are present, including Mina, and who by their presence make a supportive statement of their commitment to working with travellers to increase breastfeeding rates in the travelling community. I'm deeply aware and indeed concerned that in a modern Ireland where the benefits of breastfeeding have now been proven beyond argument, just 3% of traveller women feel encouraged, enabled, or empowered to breastfeed their babies. This stands in stark contrast to European Roma communities, where breastfeeding is the cultural norm, indeed sometimes identified among Roma women as an integral part of their cultural identity. Breast milk is the perfect food for a baby. There is nothing else that compares with it. It gives the baby the very best start in life, and the benefit will go on right through its life and the mother's life. It contains all the nutrients the baby needs to ensure that it will be healthy and thrive, grow at the appropriate pace, and be the right weight. And the breastfed baby is protected from becoming obese later in life. Through the breast milk, the mother passes on all her immunities to protect the baby's health. We're so indebted, as Leslie said, to the United Nations, the World Health Organization, and UNICEF for all the scientific research they have done, so that we now know so much of what's the very best start we can give a baby. They have found that breastfeeding the baby exclusively, with nothing added, for the first 6 months of its life brings lifelong health benefits, and the baby can then go on to complementary solids and continue to be breastfed or have ordinary milk. They recommend that this continue for a year or longer if the mother wishes. When I was young, my mother knew so many traveller women who visit her when they came to our area, near Ballandine, North Galway, South Mayo. Particularly, I remember her friendship with the Mahon women. They all breastfed their babies, as did my mother, and all the women of the country, and probably the cities too. We were 7 children, and we were 2 and 2.5 years apart, as was the case with all the children at school. So it seems women breastfed for a year before weaning, and that acted as a contraceptive. That was how it was up until the mid-40s. And then, shamefully, all that was lost as people themselves and medical people gave way to the pressure of the lie of the advertising that said formula was the best. That was such a tragedy. By the time of the 1970s, about 30 years later, when I came to breastfeed my children, almost all babies were bottle fed. Midwives had disappeared, and doctors and nurses in the hospital knew nothing about breastfeeding and could give no help to the few women who were breastfeeding. Fortunately, we were able to get help by way of information from a book on breastfeeding and some members of La Leche League. We in Ireland had and still have the lowest breastfeeding percentage in Europe, as I think, say 46 to 60 in general, and even lower at about 3% among traveller women. Thankfully, now because of the work of the World Health Organization, this percentage is getting better. Midwives are back, and the HSE has made commitments, and many of the hospitals, but regretfully not all, are breastfeeding friendly. There is wonderful work being done by support organisations such as Pavee Mothers at Pavee Point, La Leche League, Quidju, Friends of Breastfeeding, and Banyabaha, who all help new breastfeeding mothers by giving information and by meeting up to help each other and have latching on morning and have a chat. Then there is the wonderful Breastfeeding Law Group who are highlighting the unethical marketing of formula by the baby feed manufacturing corporations. And they're campaigning to get compliance with the World Health Organization code. All women from the traveling and settled communities have to continue to spread the information of the vital importance of breastfeeding and show support for each other and solidarity. When we've Latching On Day at Ours and Uachtaráin for Breastfeeding Week at the beginning of October, hundreds of mothers come, all proudly feed their babies and resolve to share this great joy and practice of breastfeeding by campaigning for the normality of breastfeeding at their homes, in their places of work, at the shops, at restaurants, and any other place they need to be to get on with their lives, with the support of their families and their communities. All expectant mothers are in touch with the medical service of the health service, and this is where the preparation for birth and breastfeeding must be started. The doctor, the obstetrician, the midwife have a duty to inform women of the benefits of breastfeeding, and prenatal classes should give the information on the preparation of the breasts for breastfeeding and all that mothers need to expect and know to make life easy, and also how they can deal with any difficulties that might arise. For instance, if there's a blocked milk duct, massaging the milk duct and the milk passage all the way from its source, from the armpit to the nipple, will re-establish the flow. In a survey by the breastfeeding group Banyabaha, they found that many mothers could not get the help in hospital with breastfeeding they needed, as there were not enough midwives, and they could not give them enough time or help them establish the latching on successfully. If we are to succeed, this must change. We must have enough midwives in the health service to ensure good practice. I think it is absolutely necessary that the midwife is fully available to the mother, and latching on takes place as soon as is possible after the baby is born, and that she is available to the mother in hospital and later at home to deal with any help that may be needed until breastfeeding is comfortably established. Knowledge about breastfeeding should, of course, be part of a doctor's training. Regretfully, there are some rare times where the medical reasons for breastfeeding are not suitable. There are times when a mother has some rare condition, such as galactosemia, which will be identified when the baby is screened after being born. Then breastfeeding will not be suitable, and the baby must be fed alternatives to breast milk, such as soy milk. As the incidence of galactosemia is high, it must be obligatory that the result of the screening by blood test is made available to the mother as soon as possible, so that unless the result indicates there is a problem, she can breastfeed with confidence without delay. This is an area for research. It cannot be denied that lack of appropriate and accessible information about breastfeeding is a key reason for the unacceptably low percentage of breastfeeding rates among traveller women. Majority of traveller women receive their health information from the traveller groups, and the establishment of Pavee Mothers, a website for travelling women by traveller women, has built a critical bridge between the travelling community and the health services, so necessary to a positive pregnancy and childbirth experience. Lack of privacy, lack of space, lack of encouragement from peers, and fear of offending others can make breastfeeding very difficult for new mothers. It is said that it takes a whole community to rear a child, and everyone should become aware that as it's the mother's human right and the baby's birthright that baby be fed with human milk, that they should be supported in this by everyone. Of course, it's also the greatest bonding in the family, and it is also the easiest. All trouble-free and cost-free, no bottles to be sterilised, no formula to be made up or getting up in the middle of the night for the father either to heat a bottle and then knowing you are giving your cherished baby the very best start in life. May I at this point thank and commend all those involved in the creation and development of Pavee Mothers. In the 3 years since your establishment, you have, I know, been a source of assistance and support to many traveller women seeking access to maternity services within our health system. Indeed, you have provided a vital link between the travelling community and those badly needed services. Today, we celebrate an important milestone in your work as we gather to launch your videos of traveller women talking directly about their experience of breastfeeding, along with a booklet which provides information on breastfeeding to traveller women. These are all most vital developments, which I am confident will lead to many more traveller women being enabled to make informed decisions around breastfeeding their babies. May I thank and congratulate Pavee Mothers on this uplifting occasion and wish you every success as you continue your generous and inspiring work. I send my very best wishes to all pregnant women and new mothers. Remember, all our ancestors were breastfed. Let us bring back breastfeeding. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think if we were in person, Sabina, we would all give you a standing ovation for that really passionate opening in terms of celebrating National Breastfeeding Week. Really beautiful comments. And I suppose, salient points around the need for more support, not just for women, but particularly for traveller women, but more support for midwives and healthcare professionals, many of whom are here today. And the knowledge, I suppose, the knowledge gap in terms of the particular needs of traveller women and identifying that, and I suppose supporting healthcare professionals, particularly as it relates to galactosemia and the Butler test. And we'll talk about that a bit later in terms of, some of the blockages, as you say, to traveller women initiating breastfeeding. And, the other point around the vast majority of travellers and traveller women getting their health information from primary healthcare projects, 83%, as you say, and the HSE's own research recently, over 70% of travellers received or accessed information from primary healthcare projects and travel organisations during COVID-19. So that vital link between the health services and travellers on the ground, in terms of making sure that travellers have access is imperative. And I suppose, the other piece that you were saying around, that, right through the ante and postnatal period, that there is support there for mothers, and that, breastfeeding should become the norm. And you'll hear from some of our most long-standing traveller primary healthcare projects talking about how breastfeeding was the norm for traveller women, as you say, decades ago, but it has died out. And, we're really here to refocus and rejuvenate the conversation around traveller breastfeeding. So many thanks for your participation, your comments this morning, and it really, I suppose, sets the tone in terms of what we'll be looking at for the rest of the morning. So what we're going to do next is we're going to view some of the videos as we had highlighted earlier. And the first one is from Mary Collins, who is a traveller primary healthcare worker in Pavee Point. And Mary has worked with the project for over 14 years and is a real leader in terms of perinatal health, but in particular in terms of championing breastfeeding. And she's particularly, interested in bridging those gaps, not only with her in her own family, as she'll talk about later, but equally in terms of the broader community. So we'll play the video from Mary, and then we'll hear from Mary in terms of response. So we'll cue the video.
My name is Mary Collins. I'm a primary healthcare worker in Pavee Point. So we'll go out to the sites and we just tell them really how important it is to breastfeed and how good it is for the baby, and especially the first 1 or 2 weeks. So even if we get them to do it for a week, it's so positive, because then it kind of spreads the word around the community that someone's tried it, and then you might get somebody else to try it. So the first milk that comes from the mother is just so important. It's called liquid gold. That if your baby is underweight and it's not well, that this is like a miracle little milk that could really strengthen them and help them. So I think the more you talk about it and encouraging them, that they get the idea of how good it is, that hopefully someone will try it. My mother did breastfeed and the granny, and it was natural, it was nature, but I think it's coming back to this generation and the next generation. So hopefully with the help of God, they will pick it up. Love to see them taking it up.
Great, so we'll hear from Mary. Mary, I think you're on mute.
Mary, a message should come up on your screen, and if you click that, it should unmute it.
Now, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Mary Collins, primary healthcare worker. So I remember my mother breastfeeding, say, a few of the children years ago, say my sisters and brothers, and I often then heard her talk about her mother and her aunties doing it with all the children. So years ago, like, it was a so natural thing to do for mothers them days to breastfeed. Of course, they had no other way of feeding their babies. So even say with big families around and living in the tents and the roadsides, of course they managed to breastfeed their children. So say for my mother then came along and she breastfeeded like a few of us, the older ones. And then myself then came along and I got married at 17. I had all my children over in England, and I never heard anyone talk about breastfeeding. So that was really the end of it then. So say when you go to the hospital to have your baby, it was straight onto the bottle. So then say when I come back to Ireland, say after my children been old enough, I got a job in Pavee Point in the primary healthcare. So that kind of started off my knowledge of women or health and looking after themselves, and say one thing led to another. Say now we're more or less at the minute now focusing on breastfeeding. So there's 16 primary healthcare workers in Pavee Point, and when we go out now, we try to encourage the young women to breastfeed. So we tell them how important it is and how good it is for themselves and their babies. So the way it is when we go out, say find out there's a young mother now expecting her baby, we kind of focus on her. So we work alongside the primary health nurse, and we let her know there's a young woman pregnant. So if she's coming out or she sees her at her antenatal checks and saying around coming for health information, we try to encourage, like Gemma does as well, to encourage the women to breastfeed. So that's the mostly thing we kind of focus now when we go out, is to let them know how good it is and say how important it is to breastfeed. But we know kind of it is that little bit harder for the women now when they're in hospital with the baby having to go on to special food sometimes as soon as they're born. We try to explain that the milk can be saved, that straight away that you can do both. So with the nurse and with the help of the hospitals, hopefully that they will learn how to do it or even give it a go. But at the minute, like we've just presented this little booklet. So this is Pavee Mothers. We've been working with Pavee Mothers to develop this little book. Now this book is very, very easily to read and very easily to look at. And it's all traveller women in it and the pictures of traveller babies that we work with. So that's very handy now to hand them when we go out. So as soon as we hear they're, say, having a baby as well, we'll give them the little book. So we tell them how important it is and try to encourage them as good as we can to breastfeed. So hopefully, like in the future, a few of them will. We know that just one or two at the minute is trying it, and we know one or two already has done it. So we're just trying to spread like the information out there to encourage them to breastfeed, and how good it is that they won't, like most of them, of course, lives in trailers and sometimes electrics that go, and we're trying to explain to them that you wouldn't have to get up to warm the bottles, or you wouldn't have to make them before you go to bed, that feeding the babies like from the breastfeed and they don't get the colic and they won't be underweight, and also like with cot deaths or other little issues or the baby's underweight or premature, that it helps them so well to come on. So the last really point I'd like to make is that say like with the health services and the hospitals and antenatal care where the young traveller women go, we'd like to see them encouraging them more as well. So when a young mother goes, say for her having her first baby, and she goes to hospital and they recognise like that she is a traveller and that it is so low in the traveller community for to have babies breastfed, we'd just like to say, ask them to help to encourage them more to breastfeed. So like once we'd see the nurse or in the hospitals encouraging the women as well, along with ourselves and our own work, hopefully with the help of God, it will pick up. So I'd love to see it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary, for that. Really excellent points around, you know, the need for traveller specific and culturally appropriate information. And obviously the work of the primary healthcare projects really driving that forward on the ground, and the need to work together with health professionals and health services to support traveller women. And the key piece there around, you know, if traveller women are accessing the maternity services, that there is support there. And really we'll hear later around some of the challenges around, you know, I suppose, disaggregated data on the basis of ethnicity and to inform service provision, because at the moment we don't have that. So really, I suppose some of the key policy asks around that and ensuring that travellers are identified within services and that are, you know, provided with culturally appropriate support and adequate support around breastfeeding. Our next speaker is Mina Burushtusuman. Hopefully I said it right. And Mina is the Deputy National Breastfeeding Coordinator. And Mina is originally from India and has a diverse professional background in terms of working in the Middle East, in Ireland and India. She's lots of experience with babies and breastfeeding mothers in her role as midwife and lactation consultant in both National Maternity Hospital and the Coombe. And she's been working in this particular role for the past 2 years. And Mina is really passionate about supporting women through pregnancy and birth and promoting breastfeeding as a natural process, and has particular interest in supporting traveller women through her work. So we'll hear a bit around the HSE breastfeeding implementation group and what they're doing in terms of supporting traveller women or addressing some of the gaps.
Very good morning, everybody. And thank you so much for Pavee Point for inviting me on behalf of Laura. And on behalf of Laura and myself and the My Child and National Healthy Childhood Program, we wish you a very meaningful and happy National Breastfeeding Week to all mothers and babies in Ireland, and also to all pregnant women and their families in Ireland. So as we rightly say, the theme of this year's National Breastfeeding Week is supporting breastfeeding through pandemic and beyond. You can move the slide and see, yeah. And also, I was very privileged and lucky to be with Mrs. Sabina Higgins day before yesterday. And I would say she has stolen all the points that we as a group who is going to discuss here. And what I understood from meeting for a good long time, what I understood is that she's not just passionate, and she's just not just an experienced mother. She has a wealth of knowledge, and I was just amazed by the information that she holds in terms of breastfeeding. And it was so amazing. And she's like an encyclopedia on breastfeeding. She's not just an advocate or passionate for breastfeeding. And that is a very, very happy news for me. And knowing her day before yesterday was fantastic. And as all the current evidences will say, that along with the WHO, UNICEF, and all the international evidence and national evidence that we have through all the studies, we know now that interventions to promote breastfeeding should be targeted, particularly with the groups less likely to breastfeed. Coming from a background of developing country, I have worked with mothers and babies who would live in slums. And from early in my training, this has been engraved into us, that the importance of breastfeeding and the importance of protecting breastfeeding for every mother, irrespective of their socioeconomic status. And I know myself that women who come from poor socioeconomic background, they need to be protected more in order to have a better healthy outcome in their future life. So as we rightly identify in the Breastfeeding in a Healthy Ireland Action Plan 2016-2021, they are targeted programs and support for traveler women, younger women, and women from lower socioeconomic groups. Can you move the slide? And as we saw earlier, that the barriers to breastfeeding to traveler women are historically modest. And I would say, in order to breastfeed, you don't need to expose any of your body. You can very subtly breastfeed. And as I see from many women from Asian countries, that you wouldn't even know that they are breastfeeding their babies. So historically, we know that traveler women are very modest. And during the antenatal period or during the postnatal period, the midwife can discuss with mothers. And with nowadays, there are a lot of breastfeeding appropriate clothes that are available. Nobody will see you that you're breastfeeding, and none of your body part will be exposed. And there are other socioeconomic factors and lack of privacy. And I myself have come across with a couple of women, traveling women, and one of them said that I breastfeed when I am in my own house. When I'm in my husband's house, I just give bottle feed. So I was amazed by her response, and I was working through with her to identify how can she make it possible that she can do breastfeed while she's in her husband's home as well. And low levels of literacy. So we need to make sure that our leaflets are all culturally friendly and they are plain English text that the traveler women can understand. And that's what the Pavee Point has just done, and it's a fantastic piece of work. And hopefully that will enable more women and support more women to breastfeed in future as well. Can we have the next? Yeah. So what we can offer the traveling mothers and also mothers from lower socioeconomic status, we have a national breastfeeding policy in which we stipulate all best practices in breastfeeding. And in that, it stipulates also what need to be done for the traveling women. And when it is time for revision, we will put more very specific steps to be taken for traveling women, and that will be reviewed. That will be for review very soon. And there are My Child resources. We have the pregnancy book, My Pregnancy book, My Child 0 to 2 and My Child 2 to 5 books available, which is very plain English language, which can be understood by everyone, everybody. And we are also building on supports that are available. We have projects that is being done in many CHOs, and we can build on the work, and that can be spread throughout all the counties so that everybody can be modeled based on the work that is already being done. And community initiatives, the Pavee Point and the primary healthcare workers and the PHNs and the maternity hospitals, there are a lot of community initiatives that becoming more aware, and we are becoming more being supportive to the traveling mothers to breastfeed. When it comes to training of healthcare professionals, as Mrs. Sabina Higgins said, that every healthcare professional, not only doctors, midwives, nurses, and also other staff in the hospitals, as well as in the community areas, need their training appropriate to their role. So we are working on a national standardized education program where everybody will receive a standardized education in which priorities are given for cultural sensitive breastfeeding education, which includes traveling women as well. And we hope to develop a care pathway throughout the breastfeeding continuum, which means that women, as soon as they get pregnant, they are being given an opportunity to discuss the breastfeeding at every antenatal visit and all the aspects of breastfeeding education that they need by the time they have their baby. So if we develop a care pathway, it will be very clear idea for every healthcare professional as to what their role is and how we can protect breastfeeding through the right kind of support. We can skip this slide. This I have mentioned earlier, and these are the books that are available, and they are very plain English content and which can be understood by everybody. And mychild.ie has a lot of information which is proofread for plain English language, which can be understood by people of every educational status. You can skip through that. And we have the Breastfeeding a Good Start in booklet as well before the breastfeeding booklet for the Pavee mothers. So that is also very plain English. And also there is another booklet when the baby is separated from the mothers. And it's very important also that considering the very low breastfeeding rates in the mothers of traveling community, it's very, very important that they are being taught how to prepare baby's formula very safely in case if the breastfeeding didn't happen in them. So it is very important, and HSA has along with the safe food, we have the how to prepare the baby's bottle booklet available as well. And then we have the Ask Our Expert service, which is available where they can ask a question and a breastfeeding expert will answer the question. Yes, we have the partnership programs between the primary healthcare workers and the maternity hospitals, and there are community initiatives, and we can skip through that as well. Yeah, explain. Yeah, and these are a few examples of the current work that is being done in Galway, Mayo, Roscommon, and Dublin Northeast. And this is a coordinate. They did a lot of work between the PHN's department and the maternity hospitals of Drogheda, Cavan General, and as well as Galway, and which included the coordinators of the traveler groups in the area, as well as the lactation consultants and dietitians. can skip through that as well. I'm conscious of the time. Yeah. So they developed culturally sensitive information and resources were developed, videos were developed, and in the Dublin Southeast, they distributed the resources through the maternity community and the GP's practice, and evaluation was done through the focus groups. And in the report, the recommendations of the focus groups, the following were the recommendations: compassionate approach of understanding this, the background of the traveling women, and continued cultural sensitive education, and partnerships between hospitals and community. As you all know, that my background is from India. As early as 2003, when I came as a new immigrant to the National Maternity Hospitals, I was very well orientated to the traveling community women, and I can surely say that I've done my best in terms of protecting breastfeeding, because I have worked in very poor socioeconomic background women. So I knew the importance of protecting the breastfeeding among the traveling community women. And support throughout the breastfeeding continuum is important. It is not that as the baby is born that you go and support the mother. Antenatal preparation is very important, and the current concept, I would say, will be colostrum harvesting. Colostrum is the first milk that is it is called the liquid gold, and traveler women, because of the challenge of withholding the breastfeeding during the early hours immediately after their baby's birth until we get the results of the butlers, the women can be supported about learning how to do hand expressing from antenatal period. And at the moment, we can say that we will have all our 19 maternity hospitals with a lactation consultant from now going forward, which can very easily facilitate this facility of personal consultation for traveling women as well as other women who may have challenges in future breastfeeding. So this should be a priority, and this will be incorporated in the care pathway that we develop for the traveling women as well as for mothers who may have challenges in breastfeeding, early challenges or late challenges. And continued support after delivery is very, very important. And the communication that we do with the mothers is very important. Even though they cannot have the mother's milk, they should be encouraged to do continued skin to skin, because continued skin to skin enhances normal flora growth in the baby from the mother, and this has a very high protective impact on the baby. And we will work on a better efficient system of reporting the Butler's result while we wait for the Butler's results. Continued skin to skin contact, which will help the baby and mother calm down, and regulating the temperature and preventing low sugar levels in the baby, and much more. And production of milk is enhanced. So every midwife is trained in a way that they will encourage the mothers to continue to do the skin to skin contact, and will be teaching mother early hand expressing if she did not learn it during an antenatal period. And as soon as the Butler's results are back, the midwives will be able to support with initiation, and these aspects will be incorporated in our National Standardized Breastfeeding Education Program, which is under revision at the moment, which we hope to launch soon, hopefully before the end of this year.
Great, Mina. So I think you might have one more slide left, do you, or is that?
I think I have spoken everything what I needed, and thank you so much, and wish you a very meaningful and happy National Breastfeeding Week. And all these efforts that we are making will make a difference to our mothers and babies, and the future of future health of the society in the future. And thank you, Laura, and all the other people who supported me in doing this presentation.
Great. Fantastic, Mina, presentation in terms of the National Healthy Childhood Programme, in terms of looking, I suppose, prioritising women and infants' health. And I suppose, you know, a really important point around poor socioeconomic status. But when we're looking particularly at the traveller experience, we would also say that racism and discrimination, rightly so, are identified in terms of a key barrier and block to breastfeeding, and obviously has a huge impact on traveller health outcomes. And you know, in terms of the My Child work, which is fantastic, we've also, Pavee Point through Pavee Mothers, have been developing a traveller specific My Child resource, which we're hoping will be launched next year. So lots of interesting points there, Mina, and we look forward to working in partnership with the programme in terms of further developing the work and ensuring traveller women and infants are prioritised within the programme. So what we're going to do next is we have another 2 videos, and then we have 2 more speakers. So just in the interest of time, I'm just going to keep my inputs short. And so the next 2 videos are from our longest serving traveller primary healthcare projects workers, Sheila Riley and Biddy Collins, and really picking up on Sabina's comments earlier around, you know, breastfeeding as always part of traveller culture, and the importance of it, you know, for older traveller women. So we'll queue up the videos. We don't have audio.
Your baby, and you put her in here. If there was someone around the place, if there was a lot of people around that you wouldn't want them to see you, and you could have this muffled up here, and you'd have your baby in here, and the baby would be getting fed the whole time. You could be feeding your baby, and as the time would come, you could be rubbing the baby's back to get up his vein. And that's the way we used to do with them times. I had 7 children, and I breastfeeded them all till I came to about 10 months old. Maybe I'd wean them off a bit then. I saw my mother, my own mother, and my grandmother, and plenty more travelling women as well, breastfeeding their babies. You can see the little babies get coming on better and stronger when they're getting the breast milk. We're primary healthcare women, and we goes out on the ground teaching the women and telling them what to do and what not to do. Well, the messages I have for all the younger women, the best advice that I could give them is breastfeed their baby. It's the best bit of nourishment that ever they got in their life. I'm Biddy Collins. My mother had 7 and she breastfed them. Because at the back of it, they knew the value of breastfeeding. Breastfeeding is an awful great thing, but I think it's dying out. Very, very fast is dying out. Well, to me, they're not getting enough of information. They have the baby, they're not getting enough of information. And if you tell the young women that has the babies that when you come out, part of breastfeed, they said to be ashamed and things like that, I think they're missing out an awful lot. They're missing out an awful lot with that baby. Because it's more of a healthy baby in every way and any way that you can get. That's it.
So really strong key points from both Sheila and Biddy, who are well respected, both in terms of the community and obviously in terms of their work as traveller leaders and spearheading, you know, traveller women's rights, and in particular in relation to the right to health. And we had hoped to have Sheila with us this morning, but unfortunately she's unwell, but obviously she's here in spirit. And Sheila, interestingly, is a survivor of breast cancer, and really, you know, talks about the importance of breastfeeding in terms of that experience. So unfortunately we don't have Sheila this morning, but as I said, she is here in spirit. So the next speaker will be Stephanie McDonald, who is the Pavee Mothers Health Development Worker. And Stephanie is going to, I suppose, provide a brief overview of the policy document that we've developed. And the document really has come out of key consultations with both traveller women and traveller men, because we see traveller breast breastfeeding is not just a women's issue, but as we've said all along, it's, you know, it's everybody's role, including traveller men and partners and the broader family. So the policy briefing really sets out some of the challenges that people have touched on this morning in relation to external challenges around having limited support in hospital, equally some of the clinical challenges around the Butler test, which is specific for traveller babies, and then equally some of the internal challenges around having limited support and understanding amongst family and friends. And then really, I suppose we set out key solutions, or what we think would be key solutions in addressing some of these challenges. So Stephanie has worked in civil society organisations, both in Canada and East Africa, and has a Masters of Public and Health, and has really driven this work since she came into post last year. So we'll hear from Stephanie now.
Good morning. As part of our work, today the Pavee Mothers Project is launching a new briefing paper on revitalizing breastfeeding in the traveller community. The briefing paper looks at how breastfeeding practices have changed over the years, from once being something that all traveller women did to now being very rare. It explores the barriers to breastfeeding that traveller women face, and it includes a number of recommendations for actions on policy, training, and promotion that we believe could create the conditions for more traveller women to consider breastfeeding. I wanted to start the discussion here, looking at the breastfeeding rate in Ireland and for Irish travellers. In Ireland, just over half, 56% of new mothers breastfeed on discharge from hospital, which is low compared to other European countries. It's important to note that these rates have slowly increased over the years, in part due to the work of colleagues here this morning. The government and the HSC has recognized that we need to be doing better at increasing these rates. Now, when we look specifically at travellers, the rate is even lower, which is 2.2% of traveller mothers breastfeeding once discharged from hospital. Traveller primary healthcare projects have observed the decreasing numbers of traveller women breastfeeding. And so in Pavee Point, we wanted to better understand what the issues were and to identify what kinds of supports traveller women and their families need to address them. To do this, we held 3 focus groups, 2 with traveller women and 1 with traveller men, as we recognize that breastfeeding is a shared responsibility and traveller men equally have an important role to play. We also conducted a number of semi-structured interviews with younger traveller mothers. Through these discussions, a number of key barriers for traveller women to initiate and continue to breastfeed came up again and again. We've grouped these barriers together into 3 broad categories. The first barrier participants spoke about was in relation to service provision. Traveller women reported that they received only limited encouragement and support from healthcare providers on breastfeeding. Most women said that breastfeeding was either never discussed during antenatal appointments or that it was discussed only once. Where it was brought up, the information was quickly covered and no practical preparation support was offered. There wasn't recognition from health service providers about the clinical barriers that traveller women would face following birth, particularly in relation to the Butler test for galactosemia and how this would impact a traveller woman's breastfeeding journey. One woman said, "I was asked once at my first appointment at 3 months if I wanted to breastfeed. I said I was hemming and hawing. I was given a booklet. It was in the package they give you. To be honest, I never read it, and she never talked to me again about it." Traveller woman questioned if there was an assumption among healthcare providers that all traveller women don't breastfeed, so time isn't spent on discussing it. Delays in receiving the Butler test results that screen for galactosemia was also identified as a barrier to breastfeeding. Galactosemia is a condition common in babies born to traveller parents. It means that a baby can't process breast milk or regular infant formula. In line with HSC policy, all traveller infants are routinely tested for galactosemia soon after birth. The Butler test is done and babies are given a soy-based formula until the results come back. Only 1 lab in the country processes Butler test samples and it's closed over the weekend. Some participants reported that it could take between 6 hours to several days for the test results to come back, which they said had an impact on initiating and establishing breastfeeding. Participants also highlighted a lack of information and encouragement from healthcare providers in expressing and storing milk while they waited for the test results. Finally, participants spoke of a lack of culturally appropriate and accessible information about breastfeeding. One participant noted that there was a one-shoe-fits-all approach when it comes to health information, including around breastfeeding, which is not always accessible, relevant, or culturally appropriate for traveler women. Further, in the context of COVID-19, there has been a greater reliance on e-health and digital resources by the health sector. This has particular consequences for some traveler women, given poor literacy levels, the fact that more than half of traveler households do not have access to the internet, and the need for digital skills to access information. We know that 90% of what affects your health happens outside of the medical system. The social determinants approach to health recognizes that living conditions, poverty, employment, and educational attainment all affect your health. All traveler participants identified the impact of social determinants of health, specifically around overcrowded accommodation and the lack of basic facilities and privacy as a key barrier for travelers initiating and continuing breastfeeding. This is unsurprising given that traveler overcrowding is 7 times higher than the national average, and traveler households are more likely to double up with 1 or more families. One woman said, "I wanted to breastfeed, but I just thought I'd be ashamed to do it. With people looking and coming into the home, there's no room. Our family is living on top of each other." For families living in trailers, there's not always a separate room for a woman to go into to breastfeed if she wants privacy. Many travelers are also living without access to electricity, toilets, heating, or running water. All of these factors combined mean that women don't have the space, time, or energy to breastfeed. As one participant said, if you're living in a really bad trailer with a couple of children and no electricity and water on a really bad site, breastfeeding is the last thing you'll be thinking about. The third and final set of barriers identified through discussions centered on limited support and understanding within the community. Some traveler women felt they did not receive encouragement or strong support for breastfeeding from their partners, family, or friends when they brought up the idea while pregnant. There's also a lack of traveler role models when it comes to breastfeeding that younger traveler women can look to and learn from. One woman said, "None of my friends breastfeed. No one my age does. I don't actually know any traveler woman who has breastfed." And this was common among the younger mothers spoken to. A low number of traveler women who have breastfed also means that most mothers and grandmothers are not able to provide the advice and assurance based on firsthand experience that women just starting to breastfeed so often need. Finally, traveler women carry a disproportionate amount of the caring responsibilities and need to make practical decisions on how they spend their time. Bottle feeding was seen as one way to do this. Traveler participants saw bottle feeding as being faster and easier than breastfeeding. This was especially true if a woman had other children or family members to take care of. Bottle feeding meant that a partner or family member could share feeding responsibilities. In the focus groups and interviews, participants were asked what needs to be done to support traveler women to breastfeed. Answers covered a wide range of ideas related to policy and practice, from the need for high-level leadership, political will, and resourcing, to supporting community development approaches. Some of the ideas discussed included identification of collective spaces and dedicated breastfeeding groups for traveler women to share advice and experiences. Breastfeeding should be discussed at each antenatal appointment by health professionals, and this shouldn't be left to maternity units alone, as most traveler women avail of combined maternity care with their GPs and maternity units. Further research into the barriers to breastfeeding for traveler women. Include traveler-specific resources and promotional material in mainstream health services, and investment in additional measures needed to support first-time traveler mothers. Within the briefing paper, we have identified 26 recommendations, both mainstreaming and targeting, related to policy and data, training, and breastfeeding promotion. For the purpose of time, we'd like to highlight 4 of these recommendations this morning. The first is to introduce traveler-specific actions, indicators, budget lines, and timeframes in the next Breastfeeding in a Healthy Ireland Health Service Breastfeeding Action Plan. And this includes an annual 1% increase in traveler women breastfeeding initiation rates. In the current action plan, which expires at the end of this year, travelers are named only once, despite having the lowest breastfeeding rate in the country. We believe it is vital that traveler women are explicitly included in all mainstream health policy and service developments related to perinatal health, and that there are key targets to measure policy implementation. Second, the implementation of ethnic equality monitoring across all breastfeeding data collection systems on both national and CHO levels to accurately capture and monitor traveler breastfeeding rates. Third, the National Screening Advisory Committee to undertake a comprehensive review and analysis on galactosemia and procedures on the Butler test as related to traveler women and infants, and that the committee more broadly take into account the specific needs of travelers within its work and establish liaison mechanisms with traveler organizations. And fourth, the HSC National Breastfeeding Implementation Group to work with maternity services to develop a breastfeeding care pathway for traveler mothers and babies in partnership with traveler organizations and primary healthcare projects, and to ensure explicit inclusion of traveler women in revisions to the breastfeeding training program for healthcare professionals. So these are just 4 out of 26 recommendations included in the policy brief. Pavee Point, alongside other traveler organizations, are ready, willing, and able to work with HSC colleagues here this morning and those in the Department of Health to ensure their full implementation and to work together towards revitalizing breastfeeding in the traveler community going forwards.
Great. Really important contribution, and I suppose highlighting some of those key barriers that were touched upon at the beginning around, the external challenges, limited support from healthcare providers, and delays in the Butler test and lack of appropriate and accessible information. And we acknowledge the similarities, more broadly in terms of breastfeeding for women in Ireland, but particularly this specific nature of those challenges for traveller women, in particular in relation to the Butler test, for example, but equally the broader structural challenges. We can't decouple traveller women's lower breastfeeding rates with the broader social determinants of health. So that is, poor accommodation, as Stephanie had said, overcrowding, lack of privacy, lack of basic facilities. And, when you're living in terms of that, it's very difficult to prioritize breastfeeding when you have much broader issues to contend with. And as Stephanie said, the policy briefing paper sets out 26 key recommendations. Pavee Point, we always come at issues with clear solutions, and we just highlighted 4 this morning. And in particular, the 1% annual increase in traveller women breastfeeding, which we see as imperative if we're going to be really serious about increasing traveller breastfeeding rates. And as part of that, ethnic equality monitoring needs to be implemented and rolled out right across maternity units on a national level, but equally on a CHO level, because we can't monitor what we can't see. And ethnic equality monitoring is one way to do that. And equally working in partnership with the infrastructure that we have, the primary healthcare projects on the ground, have the institutional knowledge, have the expertise, to be able to support healthcare providers and policymakers to make breastfeeding a reality for traveller mothers. So our final speaker this morning is our esteemed colleague, Martina Queally, who is the Chief Officer for Community Healthcare East. She's also the chair of the Traveller Health Unit in the Eastern region. Martina has over 30 years experience working in both Australia and Ireland as senior manager, and she trained as a registered general nurse before qualifying as a midwife and a public health nurse. And just, I suppose, on a personal thanks to Martina, she has been a strong advocate for travellers' rights and ensuring traveller inclusion within the health services, and in particular ensuring that Pavee Mothers was mainstreamed and funded. The project received seed funding back in 2017, and Martina was really, I suppose, a key advocate in ensuring that it was mainstreamed and driving the traveller health agenda right across the board. And more recently, Martina has overseen the development of the long-awaited National Traveller Health Action Plan, which we're very hopeful will be published and obviously implemented soon. So without further ado, we'll let Martina officially launch the resource and give remarks.
Okay, thank you very much, Lindsay, for those kind words. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for your invitation to address the conference today, which for me is always a privilege and a pleasure. I just maybe at the outset, and I've only one slide, you'll be grateful to hear, but I just want to maybe just take a few moments to reflect on the journey taken by many of the people at the conference today to get us to the important achievement, and particularly today's achievement and the celebration of what you've achieved today. A number of, while like numerous people and some of the people on the call were working tirelessly to address traveller rights and the inequalities experienced daily by travellers, 1994 marked the establishment of the Primary Healthcare for Travellers project, and that established a partnership between the Eastern Health Board, as it was at the time, and Pavee Point, and it began as a pilot initiative in October 1994 in the Finglas Dunsink area, which was at that time Community Care Area 6, with funding from the Eastern Health Board, and that was, I think, a pivotal point for our progress. The primary healthcare projects, really the establishment of them, and that model for traveller participation in the development and the delivery of health services marked a turning point to my mind. And the travellers, many of whom have talked to us today and who we meet and work with on the Traveller Health Unit, have worked tirelessly as community health workers, allowing primary care to be delivered based on the traveller community's own values and their beliefs. And as many of you have spoken about today, developing those culturally appropriate responses, so that we can begin to see positive outcomes and long-term benefits. In 1995, then following the following year from that, we had the report from the Task Force on the Travelling Community. And again, that was a pivotal point in terms of really the comprehensive overview that report gave on the situation for travellers in Ireland and the range of inequalities they were experiencing in relation to many aspects of their lives, but most particularly health. And I suppose the stat on the breastfeeding rates today is just very sobering and also very disappointing. And it is why our continued efforts in this regard are really important. The task force recommendations affirmed the primary healthcare project's work and particularly the contribution that made to the overall development of traveller health services. And each of the health boards were encouraged in that report to develop a traveller health unit. And 1998 saw the development of the Traveller Health Unit in the Eastern region, which covers the Greater Dublin area. That's Dublin, Wicklow and Kildare, which is probably, I think if I'm correct, it's about 26, serves about 26% of the total national traveller population. So the work of that Traveller Health Unit in terms of really addressing and finding ways to address inequalities is critically important nationally. So the Traveller Health Unit is, I believe, a cornerstone in terms of how health services are developed and delivered, and in terms of strategically identifying ways of tackling some of the health inequalities, and also in terms of developing appropriate mainstream services. The Traveller Health Unit in the Eastern region has a proud track record, and I would like to acknowledge Ronnie and Lindsay and all of the people in Pavee Point and the travellers that are members of that Traveller Health Unit, and indeed colleagues in the HSE who put a great deal of effort into the work of the Traveller Health Unit in the Eastern region. Pavee Mothers, as Stephanie said, was launched in 2018, and I believe it is a wonderful program, probably as a mother and as a midwife, and just in terms of the ability of traveller women to influence the health of their families, I think it is critically important. And not wanting to put any more pressure on women or responsibility, but we know that women in general, and particularly traveller women, play a really critical part in terms of caring for their families, and also hold a significant amount of influence in terms of how messages are given from generation to generation. And we've seen that with how effective our primary healthcare project workers have been as role models in their community. All of the content developed, and we've spoken about the very appropriate approach taken by the programme of work in terms of engaging traveller women and the traveller community in developing those resources to make sure that we do honour cultural beliefs and values, and ensure that the materials are appropriate, and actually that there are no assumptions made in terms of people's experience of either how the system is delivered, how messages are delivered, or indeed the appropriateness of them. I suppose the resource today, I won't say any more because it has all been said more powerfully actually than I could ever say it. But it is important for us to understand the barriers that exist. And that 2.2% versus the 56% of the general population breastfeeding is a very stark reality, and one which really requires the level of effort we're putting in order to try and address it. Because we know there is a lot of scientific evidence on the benefits of breastfeeding for the baby and for the mother. And so it is really critical that those benefits accrue to traveller children and to traveller mothers. The resource obviously is very impressive, and I have to say, I think it's really important that we fully understand the barriers that Stephanie spoke about, whether those are in terms of accommodation or in terms of support for mothers. And we know now some of the points that were made as well. And I say this having worked as a midwife at a time when very few people breastfed in this country. And my experience when I travelled to Australia and went to a society where much more, it was the norm really to breastfeed, and how much I learned as a midwife from working in Australia, how much I learned about just practical things in terms of being able to support a woman to breastfeed. And so those really practical skills about how to attach your baby, how to hand express, how to make sure you don't become sore, or how you deal with the blocked duct, as one of the women said earlier. Those are really practical challenges. And with mothers being discharged much earlier from hospital, the importance of having those supports available in community are absolutely critical. And we know that the big challenge is, first of all, to get people to consider it and contemplate breastfeeding. And we spoke about that earlier. And I think those points were really well made by Stephanie in the feedback from the mothers. Like, we know that the number of times the notion is put forward is important in terms of a woman's contemplation as to whether or not she's going to breastfeed. So to say it once and not return to the subject is obviously a mistake. It is important that that conversation unfolds over the course of antenatal care. Equally, the support for continuing to breastfeed once a mother begins and initiates is critically important. And the first few days, the first week of breastfeeding is critically important, because most people actually give up within the first few days if they don't get the right support. So it is really important initiative for the Traveller Health Unit in terms of trying to change that statistics from 2.2% to meet and greet the national statistic of 56%, and hopefully go past it, given the proud tradition we heard many of the women talk about today in the traveller community in the past. So we know that that every woman and every new mother has lots of questions about breastfeeding, but today's booklet and its launch means that those questions hopefully will begin to be answered, and that will begin to change that statistic from 2.2%. I'm not going to say too much more about the resource, because it has all been said, and I think it's a wonderful resource and I really welcome it. But I would like to acknowledge the work of Pavee Point, the work of the Eastern Regional Traveller Health Unit, and particularly the work of the Traveller Primary Healthcare Workers. I know that the resource has been developed in a way that has taken time, and the commitment that has been given to making that resource and that information appropriate and culturally sensitive. I'd also like to thank the Friends of Breastfeeding Ireland, the volunteers, for their valuable feedback into the development of the resource. I'd like to thank Sheila Riley and Mary Collins and Biddy Collins for sharing their experiences on today's video. They say, to be it, you have to see it. And the leadership of the Traveller women and the leadership they have shown throughout the journey I described today has been tremendous. And without those women, we wouldn't be achieving the results we're achieving. So I would like to pay a very significant tribute to all of the primary healthcare project workers. I would like to extend my appreciation to the speaker, Sabina Higgins, for her opening remarks, which were tremendous. And I agree with you completely, Lindsay. We would all have given a standing ovation. They were just so motivational. So thank you. Laura McHugh, in terms of HC National Breastfeeding Coordinator, and as I said, Sheila and Mary for their contributions, their time and support. I also want to just mention the National Traveller Health Action Plan, because Ronnie and I have, and the steering group have put a huge amount of work into that, and it is with the Department of Health, and we are hoping that will be published in the coming months. I know the pandemic and certainly the cyber attack set things back a bit in terms of the publication, but it is finalised from the HC perspective, and we are awaiting feedback from the Department of Health, which is hopefully imminent. I don't think I have anything more to say, except that the key commitment in that programme of work to addressing the social determinants of health is critical, because it is impossible to progress without really understanding those determinants of health and making every effort to advocate and address them in the systematic way that's outlined in our plan, and also to fully understand and appreciate the barriers they present for the traveller community. So I think that's it from me, except to say a final thank you on my own behalf And as the Chief Officer representing the other Chief Officers in the Eastern region, I know Melanie McLoone and O'Shea equally welcome the work of the Traveller Health Unit and would support it. And nationally, on behalf of the HSE, Pavee has always played a key pivotal role nationally in the development of policy. So my sincere thanks to everyone here today.
Great. Many thanks for those really important comments, Martina. And really, in terms of highlighting the need for the National Traveller Health Action Plan to address traveller health inequalities, including traveller women's perinatal health inequalities, but equally the role, I suppose, of policymakers in ensuring the mainstreaming of traveller health within mainstream health policies also. So, as I said, we really look forward to the publication of the Health Action Plan, and obviously acknowledge your work and Ronnie's work and the steering group's work in terms of trying to make that a reality, despite difficult circumstances in the context of COVID and the cyber attack, etc. So I suppose just as a tying up of the event this morning, we really want to, I suppose, reiterate our thanks and support. Thanks from Pavee Point and from the Eastern Region Traveller Health Unit in terms of primary healthcare projects, the HSE National Healthy Childhood Programme and Friends of Breastfeeding. But equally, as Martina said, the leadership of Traveller Women, many of whom are on the call this morning, and have, dedicated their lives in terms of addressing key gaps in Traveller Women's health, and spearheading and doing pioneering work in order to do that and to make that happen. And we just really like to thank you all for joining us here on a Friday morning to kick off National Breastfeeding Week, as I said, and for launching our Pavee Mothers resources. All of the resources, as I said, will be available on the website. But if you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to come back to us. And we'd be happy to address that. And I think, on a positive note, that traveller breastfeeding is the reality, and we just need to make sure that it becomes the norm again, as Sheila and Biddy have said, that it becomes the norm, and traveller women are encouraged and supported to breastfeed. So I think that's it for the morning. Many thanks again, and we'll be in touch.
Bye.